In 1916, a single post office in rural Utah received over 1,500 packages, each one weighing exactly 50 pounds, each one containing 10 bricks, and each one legally stamped and addressed like a birthday card to your grandmother. A small-town banker named William Henry Glassman had figured out that the United States Postal Service would carry an entire building across the state for a fraction of what the railroad charged. And before the federal government could stop him, he'd already mailed enough bricks to construct a two-story bank. But the bricks weren't even the craziest part of this story. To understand why a grown man declared war on shipping costs using postage stamps, you need to understand where William Henry Glassman lived. Vernal, Utah, in the early 1900s, was one of the most isolated towns in the continental United States. Nestled in the Uinta Basin in the northeastern corner of the state, Vernal was surrounded by mountains, desert, and absolutely nothing resembling a railroad. The nearest rail depot sat in Price, Utah, roughly 127 miles away. And those weren't easy miles. We're talking unpaved roads that twisted through canyons and mountain passes, roads that turned to rivers of mud every spring and froze solid every winter. For the people of Vernal, this isolation wasn't just inconvenient. It was expensive, brutally, absurdly expensive. Anything heavy that needed to come into town, whether it was machinery, furniture, or construction supplies, had to be hauled overland by horse-drawn freight wagons from the railhead in Price. Teamsters charged accordingly. Getting a ton of material to Vernal could cost more than the material itself. Glassman had a vision. He wanted to build a proper bank in Vernal. Not a wooden frontier shack with a lockbox in the corner. A real bank. A solid, permanent brick building that would tell every rancher and farmer in the basin that their money was safe. The problem was the bricks. Glassman needed them shipped in from Salt Lake City, and when he priced out the freight costs, the numbers were devastating. Hauling that much weight overland would have nearly doubled the cost of the entire building project. For a man trying to establish financial credibility in a small town, that math simply didn't work. So William Glassman did what any resourceful person does when faced with an impossible bill. He looked for a loophole. And he found one. Hiding in plain sight inside the regulations of the United States Parcel Post system. Parcel Post was still relatively new in 1916. The service had launched just 3 years earlier, on January 1, 1913, after decades of lobbying. Before Parcel Post, the Postal Service only handled letters and small packages. But the new system allowed Americans to mail packages weighing up to 50 pounds at remarkably affordable rates. The pricing was based on weight and distance zones, and the government had deliberately set those rates low. The whole point was to connect rural America to the broader economy, to let farmers order goods from catalogs and receive them by mail, to shrink the vast distances that kept small towns like Vernal cut off from the modern world. Here's what Glassman noticed. The Parcel Post rate to ship a 50-pound package from Salt Lake City to Vernal was dramatically cheaper per pound than the freight rate for the same weight hauled overland. We're talking about a difference so large it was almost comical. By some estimates, mailing the bricks would cost roughly half of what freight would cost. Maybe less. Now, nowhere in the Parcel Post regulations did it say you couldn't mail bricks. There was a weight limit per package, 50 pounds, but nothing prevented you from sending as many individual packages as you wanted. Each package just needed to be properly wrapped, properly addressed, and properly stamped. Glassman did the math. He could wrap 10 bricks in a sturdy package, slap on the correct postage, address it to himself in Vernal, and let the United States government carry his building materials across the state. Legally, cheaply, brilliantly. So that's exactly what he did. The operation was staggering in its audacity. Glassman arranged for the bricks to be packaged in Salt Lake City, 10 to a crate, each crate weighing right at the 50-pound limit. Then, load after load, the packages entered the postal system. They traveled by rail from Salt Lake City as far as the tracks would take them. Then they were loaded onto mail wagons. Then they bounced and rattled over those brutal mountain roads into Vernal, carried by the same postal carriers who delivered letters and seed catalogs. The numbers are almost hard to believe. Glassman shipped approximately 80,000 pounds of bricks through the mail. That's 40 tons. Roughly 1,500 individual packages, each one processed, stamped, sorted, loaded, unloaded, reloaded, and hand-delivered by postal workers who had signed up to carry the mail, not to operate a freight service. The Vernal post office was buried. Local postal workers watched in a mixture of horror and amazement as package after package arrived, day after day, week after week. The small post office wasn't built to handle this volume. Bricks were stacked everywhere. Mail carriers, some of whom delivered on horseback, were now expected to haul 50-pound packages of construction materials on routes that already tested the limits of human endurance. And Glasman wasn't the only one paying attention. Word spread fast. If you could mail bricks, what else could you mail? Other people in the region started getting creative. There are reports of residents mailing everything from heavy equipment parts to, according to local legend, components of a bank safe. If it fit within the weight limit and you could wrap it, the post office had to carry it. The system was being used exactly as designed, just not in any way its designers had imagined. It didn't take long for the complaints to reach Washington. Postal workers were exhausted. Post offices along the route were overwhelmed. The entire parcel post infrastructure in the region was groaning under the weight of what was essentially a private construction project being subsidized by federal postage rates. The Postmaster General's office launched a review. What they found was technically legal, but obviously unsustainable. Glasman hadn't broken a single rule. Every package was within the weight limit. Every package was properly addressed. Every cent of postage was paid. He had simply exploited the gap between what the regulations allowed and what they intended. The response was swift. In 1916, the Post Office Department issued new regulations specifically designed to close the Glasman loophole. The key change was a limit on the number of packages a single sender could mail to a single address in a single day. The new cap was set at £200 per person per day. That meant a maximum of 4 50-pound packages daily. At that rate, Glasman's 80,000 pounds of bricks would have taken over 400 days to ship, more than a year of daily mailings. The regulation was, in essence, a direct response to one man in one small town who had the audacity to mail a building. Some historians point to this as one of the earliest examples of a regulatory patch where the government had to update the rules, not because someone broke the law, but because someone followed the law too well. Congress eventually got involved too, tightening parcel post regulations further in subsequent years to ensure the postal service couldn't be turned into a discount freight company. The era of mailing your construction project one brick at a time was officially over. But here's the beautiful thing. By the time the regulations changed, Glasman had already received his bricks. All of them. Every last one. The Bank of Vernal was built. It opened its doors as a handsome 2-story brick building on Main Street, solid and permanent and real. Exactly the kind of institution Glasman had envisioned. It stood as proof that the people of the Winter Basin deserved the same infrastructure as people anywhere else in America, and that one determined man with a keen eye for fine print could make it happen. The building still stands today. It's no longer a bank. It now houses the Uintah County Regional History Center, which is almost too perfect. The structure that was mailed into existence is now a museum dedicated to preserving the stories of the region, including, of course, its own impossible origin story. A plaque on the building identifies it as the Parcel Post Bank, a name that has stuck for over a century. Glasman himself went on to be a respected figure in Vernal's business community. He had proven something that went beyond banking. He had shown that isolation didn't have to mean defeat, that the same government systems designed to connect America could be bent, stretched, and creatively interpreted by the people who needed them most. There's something deeply American about this story. A small-town banker, faced with an impossible problem, doesn't accept the answer he's given. He reads the fine print. He does the math. He mails 40 tons of bricks across the state of Utah, one package at a time, and builds his dream before anyone in Washington can figure out how to stop him. So here's what I want to know. Was Glasman a genius who exposed an unfair pricing system that punished rural communities? Or was he gaming a public service in a way that hurt the postal workers who had to carry his bricks over mountain passes on horseback? Drop your take in the comments, because I genuinely think there's a strong argument on both sides. And if you want more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary loopholes in the system, this channel is where those stories live, so subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.